The Senate is debating a voting rights bill despite it lacking Republican support. Debate is expected to continue on Wednesday when there could be a possible vote. This comes as a part of a greater push to re-examine elections following the January 6th riot and many states adopting laws to restrict access to voting. For more, I want to bring in Michael Waldman. He's the president of the Brennan Center for Justice. Michael, thank you very much for being with us. You're also the author of the book, The Fight to Vote. So let's dig in here. A summary of changes in the year's voting laws on the Brennan Center website says the push to restrict access to voting was not only aggressive, it was also successful. A tally shows 19 states passed 34 restrictive voting laws last year. What do you make of leading Democrats' decision to push forward on voting rights legislation despite its likely failure?
Well, it's a big deal, a big clash, a significant moment in the history of voting in our country. As you say, a wave of new laws in states making it harder to vote, laws driven by the big lie, by Donald Trump's claim of fraud and a stolen election. And also laws that change who counts the votes, putting the power in the hands of partisan state legislatures. And in response, Congress, meeting now, has a chance to uphold voting rights and stop this. It has the power constitutionally and legally. The question is, does it have the political will? We are finding out some of that answer this week. The legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, passed the House. It has the support of a majority of the Senate. It would restore protections against racial discrimination in voting, set national standards, ban gerrymandering. It has a majority of the Senate. Right now, a minority of the Senate is able to block it with the filibuster. There are many exceptions to the filibuster. If Congress wants to, it can pass this legislation and bring it to a vote if it chooses to. It's a really significant, stark choice that members of Congress must make.
I want to take a step back for a moment. When legislators talk about election integrity, Michael, remind us, how does that actually square with the number of bipartisan election officials across the nation who say that 2020 was one of the most secure elections ever?
Well, the 2020 election was really quite remarkable. Despite the pandemic, despite all the controversies, we had the highest voter turnout since 1900. And Donald Trump's own Homeland Security Department confirmed it was the most secure election in history. This is really something I think we ought to be celebrating instead of slandering. There is simply no evidence of significant misconduct. Court case after court case, investigation after investigation has confirmed this. So people may say that what they're doing is trying to uphold the elections, but unfortunately, these laws and proposals are targeted at voters, at making it harder, not necessarily for everyone to vote, but for some people to vote. They are uncannily aimed at Black voters and Latino voters and Asian voters, Native voters, young voters. It's very partisan, very political, and it is at risk if Congress cannot act to uphold voting rights because of the filibuster. And the courts, especially the U.S. Supreme Court, have pulled back and weakened voting laws. Then states know that they have a green light to abuse the rights of their own people. And there's no reason to think they won't.
So Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is proposing the creation of a special police agency to monitor elections. It would be the first agency of its kind. Do you see the need for that kind of unit?
Not only is there no need, it sounds like a really dangerous kind of crackpot idea, and I gather it hasn't gotten even that much support from other Republicans. Ron DeSantis pointed to Florida's election as the gold standard. There was very little controversy in Florida about how the election was run. People there used vote by mail without incident. It actually has been a relatively low controversy election, and instead of carrying that forward, what this does is basically have a squad reporting to the governor, not to normal law enforcement, that could intimidate voters, intimidate election officials, and stir up potentially false charges. we have a lot of election officials around the country. They're Republicans and Democrats. They do a good job. They work hard. It's not the most glamorous job in the country. They're not doing it for the big bucks. And they are under assault. They face death threats. They face threats of violence. And now they might, in Florida, face the threat of a politicized police force reporting to the governor, who has his eye on the White House. It's not a good look.
So, Michael, some argue, you mentioned mail-in voting, some argue that measures implemented under the pandemic were meant to be temporary, taking into account voter safety before vaccines were widely available. We're talking namely about mail-in ballots. What is the argument for keeping some of those changes permanent?
Well, it worked extraordinarily well. We had the highest voter turnout since 1900. There was security and accountability in the election. And until recently, let's remember, until the last couple of years, really since last year, or since 2020, I mean, mail-in voting, absentee voting, was one of the least controversial parts of elections. There are a lot of things where there have been divisions and fights, like what kind of voter identification people need. But vote by mail, which is used as the way you vote in 7 states, has in fact been used by retirees, by Republican voters more than anyone else until recently. It was only when younger voters, voters of color, started using vote by mail, then all of a sudden it was controversial. And it was when Donald Trump began attacking it with false claims that suddenly it became a partisan polarized split. And suddenly Republicans weren't willing to vote by mail and Democrats were. It's a very unfortunate early indication of the big lie that has slandered our elections and really is a risk itself to our democracy. We have something that worked well. And the other thing is, look at 2020. It didn't really benefit one political party or another. Republicans did better than expected in Congress, in state legislatures. It's just that Donald Trump lost. And so he says, therefore, the whole thing is rigged.
And Michael, very quickly here, to Americans who might sincerely believe that things like mail-in voting, other measures that were adopted over the course of the pandemic, truly open up the elections process to potentially fraud, to tampering. Just recently, the former Vice President Mike Pence wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, I'm sure you're familiar with it, in which he talked about how if mail-in voting were sort of forced upon the states, that there would be ballot harvesting, he said, which would essentially take advantage of vulnerable voters and perhaps then increase the risk that their ballots might be tampered with, is the language that he used. What would you say to American citizens who have heard the claims of widespread voter fraud and are still very much believing that there is something that needs to be addressed with the integrity of America's election system?
Well, I guess I would say the principal threat to the integrity of our election system are the lies of senior officials like Trump and I guess Pence, who know better, who are misleading their own supporters, who do care about the health of our democracy. Again, tens of millions of people voted by mail, voted by absentee ballots before 2020. Nobody raised an eyebrow, and there was no evidence of a problem. This is something that has worked successfully. Now, I should say that I think it's important that there be in-person voting opportunities, secure in-person voting, early voting, lots of different ways for us to make it so that people can safely and securely vote. As I said, many states, especially in the West, Republican and Democratic states, have had all their elections run by absentee and vote by mail, but lots of other states, people want to be able to vote in person. I think that's important. But my goodness, we ought to make it possible so that everybody who wants to vote has the opportunity. We shouldn't have partisan hack politicians squinting at the laws, trying to come up with ways to make it so their opponents' supporters can't vote, to make it so that racial minorities lose their power. We've had fights over voting and the state of our democracy from the beginning. That's what my book, The Fight to Vote, talks about, going all the way back to the Constitutional Convention. There've always been people who want a seat at the table, who want to expand access to the vote. And there've always been people who've pushed back and don't want that to happen. We saw White men get the chance to vote even though they didn't own property. We saw black men win the right to vote after the Civil War, although it was taken away. Women won the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, this is part of the great story of American history. What we've never had until now, maybe at least since the Civil War, is a major political movement and a prominent political leader like the former president of the United States telling lies about our democracy, as though they were lies coming from some authoritarian foreign power, saying that our elections are rigged, saying that you can't trust our democracy, threatening to throw election officials in jail, as they did at the rally in Arizona the other day, making stuff up, and it's utterly destructive to the integrity of our elections.
Michael Waldman with the Brennan Center. Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.